Teach us to pray, teach us to pray. Teach us to pray, teach us to pray. Teach us to pray, teach us to pray for your kingdom. Teach us to pray, teach us to pray. Teach us to pray, teach us to pray. Teach us to pray, teach us to pray for your kingdom.
All right, family. As we are coming in and getting ready to get back into some Flavius Josephus, we are getting set up here just momentarily. We're going to get started. So as we're coming in and getting ourselves situated and relaxed, we just came out of a class. It is day number 7 of the Feast of Dedication. Tomorrow being day number 8, last day. We are coming in right now, getting ourselves together. We had our feast after the class, and now we're ready to come in here and get some of this Flavius Josephus and then go after that. So I want to say thank you for coming in to hang out with us. We do appreciate you with the much appreciation, family. And as we get ourselves situated, we're going to get going here in just a second. Just a second, Mishpachah. So I want to tell you that we had a pretty good class today. It was very informative, very enlightening. Our teacher, as always, did a smash up, bang up job, made it really, really nice for us, and expounded on some things that should be very clear. And you know how we do. We're going to get started this way. Federal law allows citizens to reproduce, distribute, and exhibit portions of copyrighted motion pictures, videotapes, or video discs under certain circumstances without the authorization of the copyright holder. This is called fair use and is allowed for the purposes of criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody, which doesn't infringe on the copyright under 17 U.S.C. 107. And you know, we don't make fun of anyone over here. We just got to keep our head down and our hands up. Mishpachah, we have to continue to pray. Men are always to pray. You know this. Speaking to ourselves in songs and hymns and spiritual songs. And, we just keep going for the Most High. You know, we come under attack quite often, and we always have to pray. I can tell you that it's one of those things for me. I've always got to keep my head down and my hands up because I know the man I used to be, and I am so thankful that the Father has given me a new walk and a new talk, and we all should have that. You know that we always have to keep our heads inside these scriptures. We need to read these scriptures daily so that we can continue to magnify and keep these laws, statutes, and commandments because we're required to do so as we are brought back. The Father says that he wants us to do such a thing. So we have to do that as always, most definitely. And so let me say, I'm trying to figure out, is it this one? Is that one? Okay. All right. And so, hey, how you doing, family? I tell you, it's been a long day. It's been a very, very, very long day. And for one who has not done anything throughout the week, other than just celebrate the Feast of Dedication, my wheels haven't turned not one time out there in the world. I decided that I was going to take this time for the first time in the Feast of Dedication that I've not had to work or worked of some sort in a day. And I said, this week, because see the world, the nations are practicing their holidays, and I don't do holidays, I do holy days. And so with the Hasatan being the great impersonator, he's always going to impersonate the Most High with his fake agenda. And so rather than giving us holy days, they took away our holy days and gave us their holidays. So you exchange the Y for an I, and they go that way. So instead of having the feasts as they're laid out in Leviticus, they give us Christmas, Easter, birthdays, Mother's Day, Father's Day. They give us all of those days. They don't give us anything that is holy. They take away all of that and give you these pagan holidays, which they stack man's holidays on top of. But we do holy days, right? So what we have tonight is some Flavius Josephus, and that's what we're going to be going into. And I made some connections when I got up this morning. Father brought me in here, and I was on Lamentations, first couple of chapters. We're going to look at that also, and while we're looking at that, we're going to go into our Flavius, which where is it? Right here. We're going to go into our Flavius, which we've been into, and here's something else. I was reading Flavius off of the internet, the Penelope at the University of Chicago, and I know I had it on the main computer over there in my eSword, and don't have it here on the laptop. And so I got to transferring some files around, and ended up realizing that wait a minute, I have this already in a PDF, and just didn't realize that I had it, or have forgotten that I had it. And so tonight we're reading from our PDF. We're not going to go online. We're not going to use any of the University of Chicago's stuff. We're going to use what the Most High has given me, and I already had the tool right here and just had completely forgotten about it. But we did make some interesting connections, and so we're going to be going into those, okay? So before we do all of that, there it is. We're going to have a word of prayer since I'm already facing the east. And I don't know about any of you, but we operate with prayer shawls. And most of the men in our congregation who have them use them. And we use these when we go before the Most High, because He is our covering, and we need to cover our heads and show Him respect, since we are His servants and the bride of His coming. Hallelujah. Father, in the name of your Son, Yeshua HaMashiach, we come before you tonight, Father. As we gather for this reading of Flavius Josephus, Father, I pray you give me the right words for the right person at the right time. Pray the information be enlightening to those hearers. Father, those who are here with us now, and those who will come and watch this later online. Thank you for each and every one, Father, that this is not a channel that we advertise. This is not a channel that we are building for views, and certainly not one that we're using to raise any shekels. But, Father, every one that you bring here is one that you want to gather knowledge and to see what's really going on among your children. So we thank you. We praise you. We lift you up. Ask you to forgive us of our sins as we repent, Father. Forgive us of the sins of our forefathers, for the reason that they are the reason that we are in this captivity. Come and redeem your people soon, Father. We ask these and other blessings in the name of your Son, Yahushua HaMashiach. Amen, amen. Hallelujah. All right, family. Let's get with it. Okay, let's just do that. I tell you, pretty interesting. It's been an interesting day. And we're going to spend some time. It is now 8:46, almost 9 o'clock California time. We're going to run through this. Let me see. We're going to run through this as not as quickly as we can, but we're going to go through this and see just how far we can make it through. And if we don't make it all the way through tonight, it's okay, family. We will certainly go at it and continue. If we have to break it into a couple of chapters, because I don't want to stay out here long. I just want to, read through this, because as we get closer to the bottom of this thing, as we get here, we're going to see some things. And I'm reading through this because I want you to see exactly what Titus and Vespasian saw as they were coming in to take the city. So yesterday, to recap, the Idumeans left, and the rest of the zealots who were left in the city decided that they were going to just kill everybody, slay everybody. So if you had the money, you could pay your way out of the city and live. If you didn't, you could die in the city, and if you tried to leave, then you would die outside of the city in the streets. If you gave them any reason to look at you, they would drag you through the streets, take you outside the city, and kill you. So as we got to the bottom of the chapter, we saw that these things were prophesied, and they were offering themselves up, or they had offered themselves up to be the catalyst for these things to occur. Because of the prophecy, they knew these things were going to happen. They knew the prophecies, right? But they were so busy in their bloodlust that they really didn't realize that they were the ones who were bringing this about. So this is what Flavius Josephus was writing about. Get this set on my head right so it feels right. These, by the way, are some Marley headphones from the Marley family, Bob and Damien and Ziggy and those guys. And they're some of the best headphones I've ever had. They sound really great. They sound really smooth over here on the drums. And they just sound great. So I'm using these tonight so that I can get a better sound in my head. So we're going to go into the Flavius Josephus Chronicles, which is chapter 7, and it's how John tyrannized or terrorized over the rest. Now this John here that we're looking at, this is the guy that started the whole doggone thing, okay? This is the guy that got the fight kicked up with the Romans, and as the Romans got ready to take the city, he snuck out and let the Romans, knock the city off. And then by the time the Romans got into the city, they realized this dude was gone. They chased him to the next city. He did the same thing until he finally ended up at Jerusalem. And they had come all the way across the land of Israel, chasing this guy, knocking off city after city after city, till they finally had him cornered in Jerusalem. And all this madness take places in Jerusalem, and it's him who stirred it up. So we see how John tyrannized over the rest, what mischiefs the Zealots did at Masada, how also Vespasian took Gadara, and what actions were performed by Placidus. Okay, so we're going to go on in, right? You ready? Let's go. By this time, John was beginning to tyrannize, and thought it beneath him to accept of barely the same honors that others had, and joining to himself by degrees a party of the wickedest of them all, he broke off from the rest of the faction. Now, the faction were these guys that he brought together, that were the thieves and the robbers, and these were the guys. I just had a thought, and I almost said something, but I'm going to leave that for later. It's, even though it's relevant to what I'm thinking, it's not relevant to this right here. This faction is the thieves that he brought into the temple, okay? And they were robbers and killers and Israelites. They were robbers and killers. This was the people of the house of Israel who had come in along with John, and they were the ones who were robbing all the prominent men of the city. They were killing all the prominent men of the city. They killed every high priest, because those high priests had the power to shut them down. The high priest and the prominent men of the city could have rose the whole city up and made the whole city come after them. But by the time they decided to do so, these men had killed so many of them, there were very few left. And so by the time Ananus, the old man, stood up and said, you know what, I've had enough of this. I should have been doing this when I was a young man, but if I got to die for my city right now, let's do it. He rose up everyone else, and they went after, and they're the ones that started the fight with these guys and held them off until the Idumeans got there, okay? So again, when the Idumeans got there, they should have been coming to support Ananus and his faction, who were defending the city, but they were coming to support the Zealots because they thought that Ananus and his guys were the ones trying to take the city. So it was John who stirred up that faction, and he got the worst of the bunch to join him at this point, as he started to become more tyrannical and more tyrannical. Okay, so this is what he is saying right here, that by this time, John was beginning to terrorize, and thought it beneath him to accept of barely the same honors that others had. It was beneath him to, because he wanted to be the chief, he wanted to be king, and joining to himself by degrees, so that's a little bit here and a little bit there, by degrees, a party of the wickedest of them all. He broke off from the rest of the robbers and killers, that faction. This was brought about by his still disagreeing with the opinions of the others and giving out injunctions of his own, which he had been doing the whole time, if you go back and look at the other videos, in a very imperious manner, so that it was evident he was setting up a monarchical power, as setting himself up as a monarch, as a king, okay? Now, some submitted to him out of their fear of him, and others out of their goodwill to him. For he was a shrewd man to entice men to him, both by deluding them and putting cheats upon them. Nay, many there were that thought they should be safer themselves if the causes of their past insolent actions should now be reduced to one head, and not to a great many. His activity was so great that both in action and in counsel, that he had not a few guards about him. Yet there was a great party of his antagonists that left him, among whom envy at him weighed a great deal. Okay, while they thought it a very heavy thing to be in subjection to one that was formerly their equal. Okay, so now they didn't want to subject themselves underneath someone who is going to set himself up and call himself king now, because just yesterday we were equal at doing this, and now today you want to set yourself in a position to be my leader, my boss, my king. So they didn't want to do that, okay? But the main reason that moved men against him was the dread of monarchy, right? The main reason that no one wanted to follow, whether a lot of men didn't want to follow him, is because he was setting himself up to be the ruler, emperor, king, what have you. For they could not hope easily to put an end to his power if he had once obtained it, and yet they knew that he would have this pretense always against them, that they had opposed him when he was first advanced, while every one chose rather to suffer anything whatsoever in war than that. Okay, so let's look at that again, right? But the main reason that moved men against him was the dread of monarchy, for they could not hope easily to put at end his power if he had once obtained it, and yet they knew that he would have this pretense always against them, because they didn't join him, that they had opposed him when he was first advanced, while every one chose rather to suffer anything whatsoever in war than that, when they had been in a voluntary slavery for some time, they should afterward perish. So the sedition was divided into two parts, and John reigned in opposition over his adversaries over one of them. But for their leaders, they watched one another, nor did they at all, or at least very little, meddle with arms in their quarrels. For they fought earnestly against the people and contended one with another, which of them should bring home the greatest prey. Okay, so they didn't want to go to war with each other. Oops, did I? I think I went too far. Let's see. Let's do this. I did. I don't know how that page jumped like that, but it sure did. Let's see where we are. Yeah, it jumped a few different pages. Hold on, Miss Maka. Let's get back up here. Okay, here we go. Here we go. This is what we want right here. So the sedition, we're right here, okay? So the sedition was divided into two parts, and John reigned in opposition over his adversaries over one of them. John reigned in opposition to his adversaries over one of them. Over one of the two parts, that is. But for their leaders, they watched one another, nor did they at all, or at least very little, meddle with their arms. So they didn't fight each other with their swords or whatever their weaponry was in their quarrels, but they fought earnestly against the people. Okay? So when the people came up, they cut them down with their swords, or they would kill them, but they wouldn't do that to one another, and contended one with another, which of them should bring home the greatest prey. But because the city had to struggle with three of the greatest misfortunes, war, tyranny, and sedition, it appeared upon the comparison that the war was the least troublesome of the populace of them all. excuse me, that the war was the least troublesome to the populace of them all. Accordingly, they ran away from their own houses to foreigners and obtained that preservation from the Romans which they despaired to obtain among their own people. And now a fourth misfortune arose in order to bring our nation to destruction. Okay, so as I'm reading today, it's about the destruction of Israel. I'm reading the book of Lamentations, and we're going to look at that in a moment. That the nation is being set up for destruction, right? And there are people in the city who are watching this occur, and they're lamenting over the city because they're watching Jerusalem, which is the jewel of the East, being torn apart, and it's being ripped apart from the inside out, right? So we got people, Israelites fighting Israelites, and that should not be the case. Israel should not be fighting Israel, but they were. And it was like we had some bad Israelites. We had some very bad Israelites. It's almost like today we look at some of our neighborhoods. I was having this conversation earlier with someone, and I was saying that how when you look at the city and you can see, 5 or 10 young men out on the block. And they're out there, selling their dope or whatever. They earn their little money, and they put, rims on their cars and paint jobs, and they fix the whole car up and the whole nine. And then when they get into a beef with one another, everybody is strapped, right? So they all got a weapon. That's no different from what we're looking at right here in Jerusalem. They won't fight the people who come to oppress them, but they'll fight each other. So, we can be on the block and we'll have 9 or 10 guys out there. Each one of them got a gun in their belt. They'll pull their gun on each other and gun each other down in the street. And one white policeman, could come up in the midst of them and they'll scatter like roaches. Well, there's so many of them, they completely outnumber this guy that they can handle him easily if they wanted to. But they're afraid, and so they run. But they will kill each other in a heartbeat when every one of them are strapped up. And then just one guy comes with one gun and they all run. So I'm not saying that, that I'm using it as an example. I'm not saying go out there and start, smoking people. That's not what I'm saying. Well, I'm using it as an example to show you how backwards everything is. And this is nothing new. This is nothing new. Okay, so the same type of thing, beefs that goes on in the streets now, were going on in the streets then. Okay, and they wouldn't go toe to toe with a Roman, unless there was, a multitude of them, and in the city, those two factions banded together to beat off the Romans. But if it was just a few of them, they wouldn't do it. They would run. They would run, and it's the same way today. So you look at the police as the Romans. And we see that, Israel is Israel. There's nothing different. So just wanted to draw that out there and just something to look at. We can look at the past and see that there's nothing new under the sun. Everything will return and show itself again. Okay. So, and now a fourth misfortune arose in order to bring our nation to destruction. There was a fortress of a very great strength not far from Jerusalem, which had been built by our ancient kings, both as a repository for their effects of the hazards of war and for the preservation of their bodies at the same time. It was called Masada. Okay. Those that were called Sicarii had taken possession of it formerly, but at this time they overran the neighboring countries, aiming only to procure to themselves necessities. For the fear they were in, I'm sorry, let me start it. For the fear they were then in prevented their further ravages. So they were overrunning the neighboring countries, and they were only out to procure to themselves necessities. They were doing this because they were afraid. This is for the fear they were in then in prevented their further ravages. For the fear they were then in prevented their further ravages. So I'm reading that. I was reading that backwards. For the fear, because they were afraid, for the fear they were then in, because they were afraid, that fear prevented their further ravages. Okay. But once they were informed that the Roman army lay still, once they heard that the Romans weren't moving, and that the Jews were divided between seditions and tyranny inside the city, they boldly undertook greater matters. This is Sakari doing this now, okay? And at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which the Jews celebrated in memory of their deliverance from the Egyptian bondage, when they were sent back into the country of their forefathers, they came down by night without being discovered by those that could have prevented them, and overran a certain small city called Engadi, in which expedition they prevented those citizens that could have stopped them before they could arm themselves to fight them. So they ran on the city in the nighttime, so that and you go under cover of night so you don't be seen. And because the people in Engadi didn't see them, and the people of Engadi could have stopped what they were doing, but because they snuck up on them, they weren't able to stop them. That's what that's saying. So that expedition prevented those citizens in Engadi from grabbing their arms and stopping the Sakari, okay? Before they could arm themselves, the Sakari got there, okay, and fought them. They also dispersed them and cast them out of the city. So again, this is Sakari taking it. They took the city. We just read that, a minute ago. They were taking cities and scooping up all of the resources in the city. As for such as could not run away, being women and children, they slew them above 700. Disgusting. You see, and we like this. We're like this today. We're just like this today. We can't say that we don't see this in our cities. We're just like this today. Our young men. When I lived in Southern California, my mother was in a senior complex. This was 2002. Okay. She was in a senior complex, and she lived about 7 blocks from me. She just had to come out of her driveway, turn left, drive down 7 blocks, and turn right into my driveway. So there was a young man, I'll say he was a Hebrew. He was a brown-skinned man. We don't know if he's a brew or not because all skin is not kin, but he was a brown man nonetheless. He was running through the senior complex raping these old ladies. And so one downstairs and across from my mother, because the buildings, there was like her building had 4 apartments, and then there was the next building. And then there's buildings across the street. The senior complex is in the middle. They drive their golf carts. They have little, greenways that look like golf course type stuff. And so downstairs and across from my mother, this lady had been raped multiple times. And when they finally caught this guy, he was a black guy. And I was floored. I was like, folks, that was before I was in this truth. I would be sitting in jail right now if he had touched my mother. I would have did something. I would have got him. Somebody just shot a Samoan Tongan Crip. I've never heard of such a thing, but anyway, a Samoan Tongan Crip just got blasted not too long ago in the courtroom by a deputy because he ran on a witness and tried to stab a witness with a pen, and the sheriff in the courtroom shot him in the chest twice, and he died. Okay, so we hear about these kind of things, and there was another time when a man raped this man's daughter, and I can't remember if it was the mother or the father, but one of them bust a cap on him in the courtroom. That's why, another reason why they have those detectors, so you can't, before you come into the court, because people used to be able to walk into the courtroom, strapped up. And, when enough of them got sick and tired of these guys, not getting adequate justice, parents started handling justice themselves in the courtroom. So So we have this type of thing. We see this, right? This young man was raping these old ladies, and it's horrible to me when it's us doing it to us. So we see here an example of our people, or Sakari doing this to us. And we see, as for such as could not run away, being women and children, they slew of them above 700. Afterward, when they had carried everything out of their houses and had seized upon all the fruits that were in a flourishing condition, so they picked all of the fruit trees, they brought them into Masada, and indeed these men laid all the villages that were about the fortress waste, and made the whole country desolate. And while there came to them every day from all parts not a few men as corrupt as themselves, right? So they had people joining them all the time. At that time, all the other regions of Judea that had hitherto been at rest were in motion by means of the robbers. Now, as it is in a human body, if the principal part be inflamed, all the members are subject to the same distemper. So, by means of the sedition and disorder that was in the metropolis, had the wicked men that were in the country opportunity to ravage the same. Accordingly, when every one of them had plundered their own villages, they then retired into the desert. Yet were these men that now got together and joined in the conspiracy by parties, too small for an army, but too many for a gang of thieves. And thus did they fall unto many holy places. Okay. And the cities, yet did it now so happen that there were sometimes very ill. Let's go back. And thus did they fall upon the holy places. So they ran into the temples and they sacked them too, and the cities. Yet did it now so happen that they were sometimes very ill treated by those upon whom they fell with such violence, and were taken by them as men as taken in war. But still they prevented any further punishment, as do robbers who, as soon as their ravages are discovered, run their way. Nor was there now any part of Judea that was not in a miserable condition, as well as its most eminent city also, which is Jerusalem. These things were told Vespasian by deserters. So there were people who were getting out of the city. Remember, there was those people who were paying their way out. There were people who were deserting the little bands of robbers and getting to the Romans, and then there was people who were trying to sneak out of the city, and if they got caught, they got killed. So these things were told to Vespasian by deserters. For although the seditious watched all the passages out of the city and destroyed all, whoever they were, that came thither, yet there were some that had concealed themselves, and when they had fled to the Romans, persuaded their general to come to their city's assistance and save the remainder of the people, informing him withal that it was upon account of the people's goodwill to the Romans that many of them were already slain, and the survivors in danger of the same treatment. Vespasian did indeed already pity the calamities of these men were in, and arose. Hold on, let's turn the page. And arose in appearance as though he was going to besiege Jerusalem. Now you remember we just read that Vespasian had just had a conversation with his men and told them, we're not going to run on the city yet. We're going to let them finish picking each other off. But in reality, to deliver them from a worse siege they were already under. However, he was obliged first to overthrow what remained elsewhere, and to leave nothing out of Jerusalem behind him that might interrupt him in that siege. Accordingly, he marched against Gadara, the metropolis of Perea, which was a place of strength, and entered into that city on the 4th day of the month, Dystrus, Adar. So he entered, Adar is our month. For the men of power had sent an embassage to him, They sent an emissary, or an ambassador to him, without the knowledge of the seditions, to treat about a surrender. So they sent an ambassador to him without the rest of the crooked band knowing, to ask about a surrender, which they did out of the desire they had of peace and for saving their effects, because many of the citizens of Gadara were rich men. This embassy the opposite party knew nothing of, but discovered it as Vespasian was approaching their city. So they figured it out as Vespasian was coming, that somebody had gotten out and got word to him. However, they despaired of keeping possession of the city, as being inferior in number to their enemies who were inside the city, and seeing the Romans very near to the city. So they resolved to fly. That's run. So whenever you see fly, because John flew a lot. John, the one who started this whole thing up, he flew a lot. He ran a lot. He started it up, and then as Titus and Vespasian moved on the city, he ran to the next city. It'll say he flew. Yeah. And don't we say that? I mean, I read this and I see a lot of our verbiage. I see a lot of our verbiage in here. It's like, when we say that a brother can run fast, right? Say, man, he's flying, right? Because he's running, he's going fast, right? He's flying. So I see a lot of as I read through this, I see a lot of our verbiage. I think it's kind of funny because it still holds true today, like when Moses threw his staff down, the scripture says Moses fled from before the snake. Isn't that what we do? Let a brother see a snake and he's going the other way. So so when I first read that, I cracked up laughing. I was like, that's a dead giveaway right there. Moses was a brother, because a white guy would have been like, hey, what do we have here? He would have tried to pick it up, right? That's not what we don't do that. We just don't do that. We see a snake, we're going the other way. We're looking for a rock or a stick or something. We're trying to kill it. We're not trying to pick it up. We run from it, go the opposite direction, get out of the way of that thing. So, so here we have that they resolved to fly, but thought it dishonorable to do it without shedding some blood. I want to run, but I got to kill somebody first. And revenging themselves on the authors of this surrender. So they seized upon Dolasus, a person not only the first rank of a family in that city, but one that seemed the occasion of sending such as. All right, so they grabbed him because he seemed like somebody who was. That's crazy. I'm telling you, this is comedy. Sometimes, I was having a conversation with my brother, okay, and I was having a conversation with my brother Daweed. Oh my goodness, and we were talking about that. Here's a person, right? Now look, so they want to run, right? But they gotta kill somebody first. This is comedy. I'm like, look, you can pick up these scriptures. If you want to read a love story, it's in there. If you want to read some drama, it's in there. If you want to read horror, it's in there. If you want comedy, it's in there, right? This is comedy. They want listen, they can't write this in Hollywood. That's why they got to come to our scriptures to write their superhero movies. You want to see the Avengers for real? Read the Book of Jasher. Okay? You want to see the Avengers? Go read the Book of Jasher, and you see where they got it from. The lady, I forget her name, who wrote The Matrix, a sister. She confessed that she got the story out of the scriptures. Right? You can find the word matrix in the scriptures. Okay? She said, I wrote, so that's why they were so blown away when they read it, because you can read the scriptures and you can see the special effects, which was the power of the Most High. But they can't do that, so they have to use CGI and special effects, right? But when you read the scriptures, you can see it. It's right there in front of you, family. So this is comedy, this is comedy right here. I want to run. I'm ready to run, but I got to kill somebody first. So they grabbed an eminent guy out of the city, right? Dolasus, right? Ravaging themselves or revenging themselves on the authors of this surrender. So they thinking that he did it. So they seized him, a person not only the first rank of and family in the city, but one that seemed to have the occasion of sending such an embassy, right? He just seemed one that had the occasion, right? And then they slew him, right? Now you want to run, but you got to shed blood first. So we won't grab him and kill him, right? and treated his dead body after a barbarous manner. Remember, they wouldn't bury him. He's already dead, but they're still doing things to the remains. Okay, beating him, probably kicking him and spitting on him. Somebody's probably urinating on him. I mean, they're doing barbarous stuff, right? So very violent was their anger at him, and then ran out of the city, right? And now the Roman army was just upon him. I mean, it's like right there. And the people of Gadara admitted Vespasian. So they let Vespasian in with joyful acclamations and received him the security of his right hand. So they received from him. So the Romans were our friends at first. The Romans were our friends. They weren't our enemies. Okay, the Romans were our friends. So when we invited them in, we were talking about this tonight, that Greece was oppressing us. And so we sent an emissary. We sent an embassy to Rome, to the Senate, and said, hey, listen, we want to be, partners with you, because Rome would partner with anybody, So if Rome didn't take you over, if Rome took you over, you would become vassals to them taxes and whatever else. But if we said, listen, we want to join up side with you, then Rome would say, okay, you don't owe us anything, but when it's time to go to war, you got to give us some men, right? So we're not going to lean on you for taxes or whatever. We're not going to come to you and take your food. We're not going to do any of that stuff. But when it's time to go to war, you got to give us some men, and we'll be friends, right? So, you be cool with you. If you need some food, we'll give you some. We need some food, you give us some. Will you be cool with us? We'll be cool with you. That's the kind of relationship that Israel had with Rome initially, right? And this is in our scriptures, right? It's in Maccabees. And you can read it in Maccabees. That's how Rome got into Israel. That's how it got in there in the first place. They came in as our friends. But we got so wicked and crooked, they actually became our enemies, and they end up taking us over. Okay? So that's what happened there. Okay, so let's go on with this, right? So let's look at this, right? We're going to go right here, okay? So they were, again, Rome is by the city, and these people are so scandalous that they want to run, but they don't want to do it without shedding some blood, right? And so in order to revenge themselves of who they thought brought about this Rome being right outside the gates, they figured that it was this guy, Delicius, because he had the power to do so, right? So they figured, well, even if it wasn't him, we're going to kill him anyway. They slew him right here, and then they treated his dead body in a barbarous manner. So very violent was their anger against him, and then they ran out of the city, right? And so now here's the Roman army right on them, hanging right up on them, and the people of Garda let Vespasian into the city, because they knew that when Vespasian came in, when he gave you the right hand, and listen, in your Baptist churches, right? Don't they give you the right hand of fellowship? Listen, there's nothing new under the sun. They give you the right hand. Where do we get that from? We get that from Rome. We get it from Rome. It's right there on the page. We get it from Rome, right? Vespasian gave them his right hand, and that was his security, right? So when he shook hands with whoever the main power was in the city or whatever, or he held his right hand up, that's like, okay, we're cool, no problem. I'm gonna let you guys live, no problem. Okay, we're not gonna go after it that way. So Vespasian comes in to joyful acclamations, and they receive from him the security of his right hand. And what Rome always does, Rome always puts a garrison in your city. So here's a garrison of horsemen and footmen to guard them against the excursions of the renegades, right? So these are the ragamuffins who are running, who are trying to raid and rape the city, right? So they leave a Roman guard there so that these people don't come back and ravage the city. For as to their will, they have pulled it down before the Romans desired them to do so. Okay. So so when Rome takes a city, right? I'm giving you some history as we go here. When Rome takes a city, even if you surrender, right? So let's like this. If you don't surrender, Rome will rip walls down, right? And that's just like when you're playing chess and you knock over it's done, right? Rome rip a wall down to say that's a sign in the old days this city's been conquered, right? But if they don't want to, tear the city apart, like you give the city to, come on in, Vespasian, and he says, okay, here's my right-handed piece or whatever, take those gates down. He'll just pull down a gate, And that's a sign. And the gate will stay down for a while as a sign that Rome is taking the city, and then they can repair the gate, and they will repair the gate. But right now, Rome, your city's been taken by Vespasian. So rather than him knocking down, a whole, say a half a mile of a wall, they just take a wall. They just take a gate down, you know, because cities were walled at that point. You could go 3 or 4 miles this way with a wall, 2 or 3 miles that way with a wall, another 3 or 4 miles back across the back of it with a wall, come back towards yourself another couple of miles with a wall, and then come back across the front, and you've got a gate. Or you have gates on each side, but you still got these huge walls, and they might be 30 feet tall, they might be 20 feet wide, that was a security, right? And so Rome, to show that Rome took it, they would pull a wall down, or they would take off a gate. And in this particular case with Vespasian, he just knocked off the gate just to show that they had taken the city. Okay, so and for as to their wall, they had pulled it down before the Romans desired them to do so, that they might thereby give them the assurance that they were lovers of peace, and that if they had a mind, they could not now make a war against them. So this was their sign showing Vespasian, listen, we're not trying to, we're not trying to block up the city and say you can't take it or whatever. This was their sign of peace by them taking a wall down, so Rome could enter in. So then Vespasian, what did he do? He left a garrison there to protect the city. And now Vespasian, this is in 4, sent Placidus against those that had fled from Gadara. Now, who do you think fled? Who do you think fled? Right? It was John and his boys, and the rest of those ragamuffins, that bounced out of the city, because they weren't going to stick around while Rome. Vespasian, what does he do? He sends somebody after him, like he always does, right? And sometimes they catch up to him and kill, the slowest of them, and sometimes they don't. So he sent Placidius against those that fled from Gadara with 500 horsemen and 3,000 footmen, right? Listen, it wasn't that many of them that stirred this up, but that's how serious he was to get them. He sent 500 horsemen and 3,000 footmen. Now, how fast do you got to be to run with horses? Okay? Because you can trust me, these men weren't walking. If these guys were running to get away from Rome, they were running, and they had some horsemen and some men on foot, that were, whether they were jogging, went after them. While he returned himself to Caesarea with the rest of the army. So he sent these guys after them while he went back to Caesarea. But as soon as these fugitives saw the horsemen that pursued them just upon their backs, and before they came to a close fight, they ran together to a certain village, which was called Bethanabras, where finding a great multitude armed them, partly by their own consent, partly by force, they rashly and suddenly assaulted Placidius and the troops that were with him. Okay, so now they go into a town and they make these young men fight. Okay, some of those young men wanted to fight, right? That's what it says right here, partly by their own consent and partly by force. So these horsemen at the first onset gave way a little, as contriving to entice them further off the wall. And when they had drawn them into a place fit for their purpose, they made their horse encompass around them. So they surrounded them. Compassed and encompassed. A lot of people say compassed, but compassed and encompassed means surround. It means to encircle. It means to enclose, right? They got caught up in the circle. We got all the way around them. Now they're surrounded, and they took them off. They drew their darts at them, right? So this is spears and what do they call them? Daggers and things like that, right? They threw their darts at them. So the horsemen cut off the flight of the fugitives, while the footmen, this is the foot, terribly destroyed those that fought against them. So you got the guys on horses and you got those on foot. Okay, so that's what that is, right? For those Jews did more than show courage. Let's move this up a little bit. For those Jews did no more than show their courage, and then were destroyed. For as they fell upon the Romans, when they were joined close together, as it were, walled about with their entire armor, they were not able to find any place where the darts could enter, nor where they anyway able to break their ranks, while they were themselves run through by the Roman darts. And like the wildest of wild beasts, because they were a barbarous bunch, rushed upon the points of other swords, and some of them were destroyed as cut with their enemies' swords upon their faces, and others were dispersed by the horsemen. Now Placidus's concern was to exclude them in their fight from getting into the village and causing a horse to march continually on that side of them. He then turned short upon them, and at the same time with his men made use of their darts, and easily took their aim at those that were nearest to them. And when and at nearest to them, as they made those that were further off turn back by the terror they were in, till at last the most courageous of them brake through those horsemen and fled to the wall of the city. And now those that guarded the wall were in great doubt what to do, for they could not bear the thought of excluding those that came from Garda, because of their own people that were among them, and yet if they should admit them, they expected to perish with them, which came to pass accordingly. For as they were crowding together at the wall, the Roman horsemen were just ready to fall in with them. However, the guards prevented them and shut the gates. When Placidus made an assault upon them, and fighting courageously till it was dark, he got possession of the wall and the people that were in the city. When the useless multitude were destroyed, but those that were more potent ran away, and the soldiers plundered the houses and set the village on fire. That's the thing. When you don't surrender to Rome, and we can look at city after city as those who surrendered to Rome didn't have a problem with Rome taking the city. But if you didn't surrender to Rome, this is what would happen, right? So what happened here? We see what happened here. These people wanted to open the gates, but they were afraid to open the gates because of the fighting that was going on. And they had their own men because these guys came and took their young men and made them fight against Rome, right? So when these people are trying to get back into the city, they don't want the Romans to kill them, but at the same time, they don't want the city to be taken. So they didn't know whether to open the gates or keep the gates closed. So what did they do? So Placidus made an assault against them, and fighting courageously till it was dark, he got possession of the wall and the people that were in the city. When the useless multitude were destroyed, but those that were more potent ran away, and the soldiers plundered the houses and set the village on fire. So the ones who were good at fighting ran away. The real soldiers, they ran away because they were outnumbered by the Romans. And so when the Romans took the city, of course they pulled down a wall, and then they plundered the house, they plundered the city, and then they burned the joint up. So if you fought against them, they would just tear your city apart and burn it down. Okay, and that's what happened to the temple. Okay, we're going to get to that. Okay. As for those that ran out of the village, they stirred up such as were in the country, and exaggerating their own calamities, and telling them that the whole army of the Romans were upon them, they put them into great fear on every side. So they got in great numbers together and fled to Jericho, for they knew no other place that could afford them any hope of escaping. It being a city that had a strong wall and a great multitude of inhabitants. But Placidus, relying much on his horsemen and the former good success, he followed them, and slew all that he overtook as far as Jordan. And when he had driven the whole multitude to the river side, where they were stopped by the current, so now you got the big river, and you can't cross it. So they were stopped by the current, for it had been augmented lately by the rain. So now the river is up and was not fordable. So fordable means crossable. They couldn't cross it. He put his soldiers in array against them, over against them. So in front of them, they're stuck by the river, and now they got the army right in front of them. This kind of sounds like the crossing of the Red Sea. You go either the Most step in and part the waters for you, or you're about to die right there. So he put his soldiers in array against them. So the necessity the others were in provoked them, because there was no place whither they could flee. There was no place for them to run. They then extended themselves a very great way along the banks of the river, and sustained the darts that were thrown at them, as well as the attacks of the horsemen, who beat many of them and pushed them into the current. At which fight hand to hand, 15,000 slain, while the number of those that were unwillingly forced to leap into Jordan was prodigious. So a lot of them had to get in the water. And if you couldn't swim, you were carried by the current. And if you could swim, you were still carried by the current. Hopefully you make it to the other side. 200 taken prisoners. Okay. A mighty prey was taken also, consisting of asses, sheep, camels, and oxen. So you imagine all of these people running with, I mean, how far and how fast are you going to get with asses, sheep, camels, and oxen? Because they don't move fast. You know, you're trying to get away, and you're carrying all of this. These are your provisions, right? Camels are carrying your stuff. Sheep, you know, you're going to eat them and use them for wool. Oxen, you're probably going to, have some beef too. Oxen is cows and cattle. So how fast can you go when you have a bunch of oxen and sheep and camels and donkeys? Because, donkeys don't move fast, right? There's not horses. So everything they got moves slow. Okay? They might move quickly, but they're not moving. Cows can trot. Cows can even run. They stampede, they'll run you down. But you don't want cows stampede to be in control. So you're trying to control this. You got a herd of various different animals. So that means that there's quite a few different people handling. There's people handling these sheep. There's people handling these cows. There's people handling these cattle. There's people handling these things. So as they're handling these things, they're not moving, fast. They might be moving quickly, but they're not moving fast. Okay. And so this is quite interesting to see this going down. Now, we're going to go a little bit further, and then we're going to call it for the night, and we'll pick it back up tomorrow. All right? Now, this destruction that fell upon the Jews, as it was not inferior to any of the rest in itself, so did it still appear greater than it really was. And this, because not only the whole country through which they fled was filled with slaughter, and Jordan could not be passed over for bodies that were in it, but because the lake asphaltus, that's asphalt right there, folks. Asphaltus was also full of dead bodies that were carried down in it by a river. And now Placidus, after this good success he had, fell violently on the neighboring smaller cities. So let's a bit further. Which, when he took Abila and Julius and Bezemoth and all those that lay as far as lake, and put such of the deserters into each of them as he thought proper, he then put his soldiers on board ships and slew such as fled to the lake, insomuch that all Perea had either surrendered themselves or were taken by the Romans as far as Marcaris. Okay? All right. So that's page 1376. This is chapter 8, and we're going to leave it right there. When we come back, we're going to see how Vespasian, upon hearing some of the commotions in Gaul, made haste to finish off the Jewish war. And then we get a description of Jericho and the Great Plain with an account besides the lake of Asphaltus. All right. So, family, this is, oh my. I see I didn't turn that page over for you. So I'll tell you what, let's do this. Let's do this. We'll go back to right here. So we'll read it from here. And now those that guarded the wall were in great doubt what to do, for they could not bear the thought of excluding those that came out of Gadara, because of their own people that were among them, and yet if they should admit them, they expected to perish with them, which came to pass accordingly. So it happened anyway, right? For as they were crowding together on the wall, the Roman horsemen were just ready to fall in with them. However, the guards prevented them and shut the gates. When Placidus made an assault against them, and fighting courageously until dark, he got possession of the wall and of the people that were in the city, when the useless multitudes were destroyed. But the potent ran away, and the soldiers plundered the houses, set the village on fire, and as for those that ran out of the village, they stirred up as were in the country, and exaggerating their own calamities, and telling them that the whole army of the Romans was upon them, to put them in great fear on every side. So they got in great numbers together and fled, Okay, and where'd they flee to? They fled to Jericho, for they knew no other place that could afford them any hope of escaping. Because, and this is because, it being a city that had a strong wall. Jericho had a strong wall like Jerusalem had a strong wall. So Jericho had a strong wall and a great multitude of inhabitants. But Placidus, relying much upon his horsemen and his former good success, followed them and slew all that he overtook, as far as Jordan. And when he had driven the whole multitude to the riverside where they were stopped by the current, for it had been augmented lately by rains, it was not fordable, he put his soldiers in array over against them. So the necessity the others were in provoked them to hazard a battle. It caused them to have to turn around and fight. They couldn't just stand there or die or drown. They caused them to fight because there was no place whither they could flee. They then extended themselves a very long way along the banks of the river. So they're stretched out, not together in a group, but stretched out, and sustained the darts that were thrown at them, as well as the attack, who beat many of them and pushed them into the current. At which fight, hand to hand, 15,000 of them were slain, while the number of them that were unwillingly forced to leap into the Jordan was prodigious. There were 2,200 taken prisoners. That's a lot of people. Okay, 2,200 were taken prisoners. Mighty prey was asses, sheep, camels, and oxen. Now the destruction that fell upon the Jews, as it was not inferior to any of the rest in itself, so it did still appear greater than it really was. And this because not only the whole country through which they fled was filled with slaughter, and Jordan could not be passed over by reason of the dead bodies that were in it, but because of Lake Asphaltis was also full of dead bodies that were carried down into it by the river. And now Placidus, after his good success that he had, fell violently upon the neighboring smaller villages. Okay, this is the end of it. When he took Abila and Julius and Bezemoth and all those that lay as far as Lake Asphaltis, and put such of the deserters into each of them as he thought proper. He then put his soldiers on board ships and slew He then put his soldiers on the ships and slew such as had fled to the lake, insomuch that all Perea had either surrendered themselves or were taken by the Romans as far as Marcaris. Okay, and that's the end of that one. Okay, then we come to chapter 8. So let me apologize, family, for not turning the page, and you didn't get a chance to see that prior, but we see it now. So actually, like, again, we're going to stop right here, and then we're going to pick it up tomorrow. And we pick it up tomorrow. We'll come back and we'll look at the rest of this chapter 8, and we'll just go from there. Okay, family? So I tell you what, we're going to call it right there. I want to say thank you for hanging out. I want to say thank you for being with us tonight while we did this. And we'll come back again tomorrow night, and we'll do it again, or tomorrow, whichever comes. I'm not actually sure. We may, do this again during the daytime before class tomorrow night, which probably is a thing that we'll do. Is do it that way before class tomorrow night, and then after class tomorrow night, we'll get some more. But if that's the case, we'll just say all praises to the Most High, and just go for it at that point. So I want to say thank you for hanging out with us, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Teach us to pray, teach us to pray.
Shalom, family.
Teach us to pray, teach us to pray. Teach us to pray, teach us to pray. Teach us to pray, teach us to pray. Teach us to pray, teach us to pray.